Marcus Henderson owned 3,000 acres of prime farmland in rural Nebraska, making him one of the wealthiest men in the county. His cornfield stretched as far as the eye could see, and his cattle operation supplied beef to half the state. At 62, he had built an empire from nothing, starting with a small plot inherited from his father. Now, his biggest concern should have been which of his children would inherit the business. But lately, something else entirely consumed his thoughts. His daughter Rebecca had been acting strangely for months. The 24-year-old had always been the responsible one, helping manage the farm's books and coordinating with suppliers. Unlike her older brother Jake, who preferred spending his trust fund on expensive cars and weekend trips to Las Vegas, Rebecca genuinely cared about the family business. She understood crop rotations, knew every employee by name, and could negotiate with buyers better than Marcus himself. But recently, everything changed. Rebecca would disappear for hours without explanation, claiming she was visiting friends in town or running errands. Her phone would go straight to voicemail, and when she returned, she seemed distracted, almost secretive. Marcus noticed her checking her phone constantly during family dinners, smiling at messages she wouldn't share. Most concerning of all, she had started leaving the house every evening around sunset, returning well after midnight. Marcus trusted his daughter completely, but as a protective father, he couldn't ignore the red flags. Rebecca had always been honest with him about everything: her college boyfriends, her career aspirations, even her concerns about Jake's spending habits. This sudden secrecy felt completely out of character. He wondered if she was seeing someone she didn't want the family to know about, perhaps someone Marcus wouldn't approve of. The farming community in their area was tight-knit, and gossip traveled fast. Marcus had heard whispers at the local diner about Rebecca being seen in town at odd hours, but no one could give him specific details. His wife Catherine had tried talking to Rebecca, but their daughter deflected every question with vague responses and quick subject changes. Marcus decided he needed to know what was happening. As a successful businessman, he believed in gathering information before making decisions. If Rebecca was in some kind of trouble, he wanted to help her. If she was simply dating someone new, he could respect her privacy while ensuring she was safe. But the uncertainty was eating at him. The next evening, as Rebecca prepared to leave the house, Marcus made his decision. He would follow her discreetly, just to understand what was drawing her away from home every night. He had no intention of confronting her or interfering with whatever she was doing. He simply needed to know that his daughter was safe and making good choices. As Rebecca's car pulled out of the driveway, Marcus waited a few minutes before following at a safe distance. He had no idea that what he was about to discover would not only change his understanding of his daughter, but also expose a web of corruption that reached the highest levels of local government. The truth was far more dangerous than Marcus could have imagined, and Rebecca's secretive behavior was actually protecting everyone she loved from a threat that could destroy their entire family. What started as a father's concern for his daughter was about to become a battle for justice that would shake their small farming community to its core. As Marcus drove through the gathering darkness, following Rebecca's taillights toward an uncertain destination, he couldn't have known that this decision would lead to the most challenging and rewarding experience of his life. The wealthy farmer who had built his fortune through hard work and honest dealing was about to discover that sometimes the most important battles aren't fought in boardrooms or fields, but in the shadows where corruption thrives and heroes are born. Rebecca's car turned down a dirt road Marcus had never noticed before, heading toward what appeared to be an abandoned section of the county. As he followed, keeping his headlights off and relying on moonlight, Marcus felt his anxiety growing. What could possibly be drawing his daughter to such a desolate area night after night? The answer would change everything he thought he knew about his family, his community, and the true meaning of courage. Marcus Henderson was about to learn that his daughter wasn't just the responsible farm manager he had raised her to be. She was a hero fighting a battle that could save dozens of lives and expose a conspiracy that had been poisoning their community for years. As the two vehicles disappeared into the darkness, neither father nor daughter knew that their lives were about to intersect with a story of corruption, courage, and justice that would become legendary in their small Nebraska town. The wealthy farmer's simple desire to protect his daughter was about to unleash a chain of events that would expose the truth and deliver justice to those who had been silenced by fear and intimidation. The investigation that began with a concerned father following his daughter would ultimately reveal a network of abuse, corruption, and cover-ups that reached from the local sheriff's office to the state capitol. What Marcus discovered that night would not only vindicate his daughter's secretive behavior, but also prove that sometimes the most unlikely heroes emerge from the most ordinary circumstances. Marcus Henderson thought he was simply following his daughter to ensure her safety. Instead, he was about to embark on the most important journey of his life, one that would test his courage, challenge his assumptions, and ultimately prove that justice delayed is not always justice denied. The wealthy farmer who had spent his life building an empire was about to discover that his greatest achievement would be helping his daughter tear down a system of corruption that had been destroying innocent lives for far too long. Rebecca turned into what appeared to be an abandoned farmhouse, and Marcus parked his truck behind a grove of trees about 100 yards away. As he watched through binoculars, he saw his daughter walk toward the house, where several other vehicles were already parked. Through the windows, he could see multiple people gathered inside, and it was clear this wasn't a social gathering. Whatever was happening in that house was serious, organized, and clearly something Rebecca felt was important enough to risk her safety for night after night. Marcus's concern deepened as he realized his daughter had been coming to secret meetings in an isolated location. The questions multiplied in his mind. Who were these people? What were they planning? And most importantly, why was his daughter involved in something she felt she couldn't share with her family? The wealthy farmer who had built his fortune through careful planning and calculated risks was about to learn that his daughter had inherited more than just his business acumen. She had also inherited his sense of justice and his unwillingness to stand by while others suffered. What Marcus was witnessing was not a daughter making poor choices, but a young woman making the most courageous choice of her life. As he settled in to watch and wait, Marcus Henderson had no idea that he was about to become part of a story that would be told for generations. The concerned father who had followed his daughter into the darkness was about to discover that sometimes the most important battles are fought not in the light of day, but in the shadows where truth hides and justice waits to be served. The abandoned farmhouse held secrets that would shock the entire community, and Rebecca's involvement in whatever was happening inside would prove that the Henderson family's commitment to doing what's right ran deeper than anyone had imagined. Marcus was about to learn that his daughter's secretive behavior wasn't something to worry about. It was something to be proud of. As the minutes ticked by and more vehicles arrived at the mysterious gathering, Marcus realized that whatever his daughter was involved in was much bigger than he had anticipated. The wealthy farmer who had spent his life building a legacy was about to discover that his greatest legacy might be the courage and integrity he had instilled in his daughter, qualities that were about to change their community forever. The story that began with a father's concern was about to become a tale of justice, courage, and the power of ordinary people to extraordinary things when they refuse to stand by while others suffer. Marcus Henderson thought he was simply following his daughter to protect her, but he was actually about to witness the most heroic thing she had ever done. Through his binoculars, Marcus watched as his daughter disappeared into the farmhouse, joining what appeared to be a carefully planned meeting. The wealthy farmer who had always believed in the importance of family was about to discover that sometimes protecting family means joining them in their fight for justice, even when that fight takes place in the shadows of an abandoned farmhouse on a dark Nebraska night. The truth about what Rebecca was doing in that house would not only vindicate her secretive behavior, but also expose a conspiracy that had been hiding in plain sight for years. Marcus Henderson was about to learn that his daughter hadn't been keeping secrets from him. She had been protecting him from a truth so dangerous that it could have destroyed everything he had worked to build. As the gathering inside the farmhouse continued, Marcus realized that his decision to follow his daughter had led him to something far more significant than he had ever imagined. The concerned father who had come looking for answers was about to become part of the solution to a problem that had been plaguing their community for far too long. The wealthy farmer who had built his fortune through hard work and honest dealing was about to discover that his greatest challenge wouldn't be fought in boardrooms or fields, but in the shadows where corruption thrives and heroes are born. Marcus Henderson's simple desire to protect his daughter was about to become a battle for justice that would define the rest of his life. Marcus crept closer to the farmhouse, staying in the shadows of the overgrown cornfield that surrounded the property. Through a partially open window, he could hear voices inside, and what he heard made his blood run cold. His daughter Rebecca was speaking to what appeared to be a group of young women, and the topic of their discussion was far more serious than he had ever imagined. "The sheriff's department won't help us," Rebecca was saying, her voice steady but filled with determination. "Deputy Morrison is part of the problem, and Sheriff Patterson either doesn't know or doesn't care. We have to document everything ourselves if we want justice." Marcus listened in growing horror as the women in the group began sharing their stories. Each tale was more disturbing than the last, describing a pattern of abuse, intimidation, and cover-ups that had been going on for years. The common thread connecting all their stories was Deputy Morrison, a man Marcus had known casually from community events and had always considered a respectable law enforcement officer. Rebecca was taking notes, organizing testimonies, and coordinating what appeared to be a comprehensive investigation into Deputy Morrison's abuse of power. Marcus realized that his daughter hadn't been sneaking around for some teenage rebellion or secret romance. She had been building a case against a corrupt police officer who had been victimizing young women in their community. The wealthy farmer who had always trusted the local authorities felt his worldview shifting as he listened to story after story of abuse, threats, and intimidation. These weren't vague accusations or rumors. They were detailed, consistent accounts from multiple victims who had found each other and decided to fight back together. Marcus learned that Rebecca had become involved when her college roommate, Jennifer Walsh, had been pulled over by Deputy Morrison 6 months earlier. What should have been a routine traffic stop had turned into something far more sinister. Jennifer had been threatened, intimidated, and ultimately too frightened to report the incident through official channels. Instead, Jennifer had confided in Rebecca, who had used her natural organizing skills and business acumen to help Jennifer find other victims. Through social media and word of mouth, they had discovered that Deputy Morrison had been abusing his authority for years, targeting young women who were unlikely to be believed or who were too scared to come forward. The group had been meeting in secret, because they had learned that Deputy Morrison had connections throughout the local law enforcement community. Several women had attempted to file official complaints, only to have their reports mysteriously disappear or be dismissed without investigation. The corruption ran deeper than anyone had imagined, and the victims had realized they would need to build an airtight case before they could hope for justice. Rebecca had been using her family's resources and connections to help the group. Her business experience had taught her the importance of documentation, and she had been helping the women compile evidence, organize testimonies, and prepare for what they hoped would eventually be a federal investigation. Marcus felt a surge of pride mixed with concern as he realized what his daughter had been doing. She had been risking her safety and reputation to help women who had nowhere else to turn. The secretive meetings, the late nights, the constant phone calls, it all made sense now. Rebecca hadn't been hiding something shameful. She had been protecting something precious. The wealthy farmer who had followed his daughter out of concern was beginning to understand that she had inherited more than just his business skills. She had also inherited his sense of justice and his unwillingness to stand by while others suffered. What he was witnessing wasn't a daughter making poor choices. It was a young woman making the most courageous choice of her life. As Marcus listened to the women share their stories and plan their next steps, he realized that his daughter was not just participating in this effort, she was leading it. Her organizational skills, her access to resources, and her determination to see justice done had made her the natural coordinator of what was essentially an underground investigation. The implications of what he was learning began to sink in. If Deputy Morrison was as dangerous as these women claimed, then Rebecca had been putting herself at considerable risk. The corrupt officer would not hesitate to retaliate against anyone who threatened to expose him, and Rebecca's prominent position in the community would make her an easy target. Marcus knew he had to make a decision. He could retreat to his truck and pretend he had never witnessed this gathering, hopping to protect his daughter by staying out of the situation. Or he could step forward and use his considerable resources and influence to help these women achieve the justice they deserved. The wealthy farmer who had built his fortune through careful calculation and risk assessment realized that this was not a business decision. It was a moral imperative. His daughter had shown him what true courage looked like, and he could not let her face this dangerous situation alone. As the meeting inside the farmhouse continued, Marcus Henderson made the decision that would define the rest of his life. He would not only support his daughter's fight for justice, but he would also use every resource at his disposal to ensure that Deputy Morrison and anyone else involved in this corruption would face the consequences of their actions. The concerned father who had followed his daughter into the darkness was about to step into the light and join the fight for justice. Marcus Henderson was about to discover that sometimes the most important battles are fought not for profit or personal gain, but for the simple principle that right should triumph over wrong. The wealthy farmer who had spent his life building an empire was about to learn that his greatest achievement would be helping his daughter tear down a system of corruption that had been destroying innocent lives for far too long. Marcus Henderson's journey from concerned father to justice warrior was about to begin, and the consequences would ripple through their small Nebraska community for years to come. Marcus made his decision. He walked directly to the front door of the farmhouse and knocked firmly. The voices inside immediately fell silent, and he could hear whispered conversations and movement as the women tried to decide how to respond to this unexpected visitor. Rebecca opened the door, her face pale with shock and fear when she saw her father standing there. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of the situation hanging heavy in the air between them. "Dad," Rebecca whispered, her voice barely audible, "what are you doing here?" Marcus looked past his daughter to the group of young women gathered in the farmhouse living room. They were all staring at him with expressions ranging from terror to defiance, clearly wondering if their secret meetings had been discovered by someone who might report them to the very authorities they were trying to avoid. "I followed you," Marcus said simply. "I was worried about you, and I wanted to make sure you were safe. I heard enough of your conversation to understand what's happening here." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears, whether from relief or fear, Marcus couldn't tell. "Dad, you don't understand how dangerous this is. Deputy Morrison has connections everywhere. If he finds out what we're doing, then we make sure he doesn't find out until we're ready," Marcus interrupted. "And when we are ready, we make sure the evidence is so overwhelming that his connections won't be able to protect him." The women in the room exchanged glances, uncertain whether to trust this unexpected ally or to flee before their secret was exposed further. Marcus understood their hesitation. They had been betrayed by the very system that was supposed to protect them, and trusting anyone in authority was a risk they couldn't afford to take lightly. "My name is Marcus Henderson," he said, addressing the group. "I'm Rebecca's father, and I own Henderson Farms. I've lived in this community for over 40 years, and I've built my reputation on doing business honestly and treating people fairly. I'm here tonight because I believe what my daughter is doing is right, and I want to help." Jennifer Walsh, the college roommate whose experience had started Rebecca's involvement, stepped forward. "Mr. Henderson, with all due respect, we've learned not to trust anyone in positions of power. How do we know you won't go to Sheriff Patterson or someone else who might warn Deputy Morrison?" Marcus nodded, understanding her suspicion. "Because I've just learned that the system I trusted to protect my community has been failing the most vulnerable people in it. Because my daughter has shown me what real courage looks like, and I won't let her face this alone. And because I have resources and connections that can help you get justice without putting yourselves at any more risk. Rebecca wiped her eyes and looked at her father with a mixture of gratitude and concern. Dad, if Deputy Morrison finds out you're involved, he could target our entire family. The farm, Jake, Mom, everyone we care about could be in danger. Marcus placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder. Sweetheart, if we don't stop him, how many more women will he hurt? How many more families will be destroyed while we stay silent to protect ourselves? You've already shown me that staying safe isn't worth the cost if it means allowing evil to continue. The wealthy farmer who had built his fortune through calculated risks was about to take the biggest risk of his life. But as he looked at his daughter and the brave women who had found the courage to fight back against corruption, Marcus Henderson knew that some things were worth more than safety or money. "What do you need?" he asked the group. "Money for legal fees, a safe place to meet, connections to federal authorities who can't be bought or intimidated. I'm offering everything I have to help you get justice." The women looked at each other, and slowly, one by one, they began to nod. They had been fighting this battle alone for months, and the addition of Marcus Henderson's resources and influence could be the turning point they needed. Rebecca smiled at her father through her tears. "Dad, there's something else you need to know. Deputy Morrison isn't just abusing his authority with traffic stops. We've discovered that he's been taking bribes from drug dealers, protecting illegal gambling operations, and even threatening local business owners who refuse to pay for protection." Marcus felt his anger growing as he realized the full scope of the corruption they were facing. Deputy Morrison wasn't just a bad cop. He was a criminal using his badge to extort and abuse the very people he was supposed to protect. "How long has this been going on?" Marcus asked. "Based on what we've learned, at least 5 years," Rebecca replied. "Maybe longer. He's been very careful to target people who are unlikely to be believed or who are too scared to come forward. Young women, immigrants, people with criminal records, anyone who might not be taken seriously if they complained." Marcus realized that his daughter had uncovered a conspiracy that reached far beyond simple abuse of power. This was organized crime hiding behind a badge, and it had been poisoning their community for years, while everyone trusted the system to protect them. The wealthy farmer who had always played by the rules was about to learn that sometimes the rules themselves are corrupt, and the only way to achieve justice is to fight fire with fire. Marcus Henderson was about to discover that his greatest battle wouldn't be fought in boardrooms or fields, but in the shadows where corruption thrives and heroes are born. As the group began to share their evidence and plan their next steps, Marcus realized that his simple desire to protect his daughter had led him to something far more significant than he had ever imagined. The concerned father who had followed his daughter into the darkness was about to become the catalyst for exposing a web of corruption that had been hiding in plain sight for years. The wealthy farmer who had built his empire through hard work and honest dealing was about to put everything on the line to ensure that justice would finally be served. Marcus Henderson's journey from concerned father to justice warrior was about to change not only his life, but the lives of everyone in their small Nebraska community. Over the next several hours, Marcus listened as the women shared their evidence and testimonies with him. What he learned was more disturbing than he had imagined possible. Deputy Morrison had been systematically abusing his authority for years, and the corruption extended far beyond one rogue officer. The group had documented incidents involving at least 12 different women, ranging from inappropriate behavior during traffic stops to outright assault. Morrison had been particularly targeting college students and young women who were new to the area, calculating that they would be less likely to have local connections or support systems. But the sexual misconduct was only part of the story. The women had also uncovered evidence of Morrison's involvement in drug trafficking, illegal gambling, and a protection racket that targeted local businesses. He had been using his position to facilitate criminal activity while simultaneously covering up his own crimes. Jennifer Walsh had been keeping detailed records of everything they had discovered. She showed Marcus photographs, recorded conversations, and witness statements that painted a picture of corruption that reached into multiple levels of local government. "We tried to report him through official channels," explained Sarah Kim, a nursing student who had been one of Morrison's first victims. But every time someone filed a complaint, it would disappear or be dismissed. We realized that Morrison had allies in the sheriff's department and possibly in the prosecutor's office as well. Marcus studied the evidence, his business mind analyzing the situation like a complex financial deal. The women had done excellent work documenting their cases, but they lacked the resources and connections needed to overcome the institutional protection that Morrison enjoyed. "What about the FBI?" Marcus asked. "Surely federal authorities would investigate this kind of corruption." Rebecca shook her head sadly. "We tried that too. We sent everything to the FBI field office in Omaha, but we never heard back. Either they don't believe us, or someone is preventing the investigation from moving forward." Marcus felt his anger building as he realized the full scope of the cover-up. This wasn't just about one corrupt deputy. It was about a system that had been deliberately designed to protect criminals while silencing their victims. The wealthy farmer who had always trusted the system was beginning to understand that sometimes the system itself is the problem. Marcus Henderson was about to learn that achieving justice would require more than just following proper procedures. It would require courage, determination, and a willingness to take risks that could destroy everything he had built. What if we bypass the local authorities entirely? Marcus suggested. I have connections in the state government, and I know people who work with federal investigators. Maybe we can find someone who isn't compromised by local politics. The women looked at each other hopefully. They had been fighting this battle for months without making any real progress, and Marcus's resources and connections could be the breakthrough they needed. There's something else, Rebecca said quietly. We think Deputy Morrison knows we're investigating him. Some of the women have been followed, and there have been break-ins at 2 of their apartments. Nothing was stolen, but their computers and phones were searched. Marcus felt a chill as he realized the danger his daughter had been facing. If Morrison suspected that Rebecca was involved in the investigation, the entire Henderson family could be at risk. We need to move quickly, Marcus said. If Morrison knows about your investigation, he'll either try to intimidate you into silence or destroy the evidence before it can be used against him. The group spent the rest of the night planning their next steps. Marcus offered to hire private investigators to gather additional evidence, and he promised to use his political connections to find federal authorities who could be trusted to investigate without interference from local officials. As dawn approached, the women began to leave the farmhouse, each taking precautions to ensure they weren't followed. Marcus and Rebecca were among the last to leave, and as they walked to their vehicles, Rebecca turned to her father with tears in her eyes. "Dad, I'm sorry I couldn't tell you what was happening. I was trying to protect you and the family from getting involved in something so dangerous." Marcus hugged his daughter tightly. "Sweetheart, you have nothing to apologize for. You've shown more courage than most people ever will, and I'm proud of you for fighting for what's right. But from now on, we face this together." The wealthy farmer who had followed his daughter out of concern was now committed to helping her achieve justice. Marcus Henderson had discovered that his greatest legacy wouldn't be the farm empire he had built, but the courage and integrity he had instilled in his daughter. As they drove home in the early morning light, both father and daughter knew that their lives had changed forever. The battle against corruption would be dangerous and difficult, but they would face it together, armed with the truth and determined to see justice served. The concerned father who had stumbled upon his daughter's secret investigation was about to become the catalyst for exposing a conspiracy that had been poisoning their community for years. Marcus Henderson's journey from worried parent to justice warrior was about to change not only his life, but the lives of everyone Deputy Morrison had victimized. The wealthy farmer who had built his fortune through careful planning and calculated risks was about to put everything on the line for a cause that was worth more than money. The simple principle that right should triumph over wrong, no matter the cost. Marcus Henderson spent the next week using his connections and resources to gather additional evidence against Deputy Morrison. He hired a private investigation firm from Lincoln, ensuring that the investigators had no ties to local law enforcement. He also reached out to a contact in the state attorney general's office, carefully feeling out whether there was anyone who could be trusted to investigate without interference. The private investigators quickly confirmed what the women had suspected. Deputy Morrison's corruption was extensive and well organized. They discovered evidence of bribes, extortion, and criminal conspiracy that went far beyond the sexual misconduct that had initially triggered the investigation. More importantly, they uncovered evidence that Morrison was not acting alone. The investigation revealed that Sheriff Patterson was aware of Morrison's activities and had been actively covering them up. The corruption extended into the prosecutor's office, where District Attorney Robert Chen had been dismissing cases and suppressing evidence to protect Morrison and his criminal associates. Marcus realized that they were facing a conspiracy that involved multiple levels of local government. The women's earlier attempts to seek justice had failed because the entire system was designed to protect the criminals rather than their victims. Armed with this new evidence, Marcus arranged a meeting with Assistant Attorney General Lisa Thompson, a prosecutor who specialized in public corruption cases. Thompson had a reputation for integrity and had successfully prosecuted several high-profile corruption cases involving local officials. Marcus, Rebecca, and 3 other victims met with Thompson at a secure location in Lincoln. They presented their evidence and testimonies, explaining how local authorities had systematically covered up Morrison's crimes while intimidating his victims into silence. Thompson was visibly disturbed by what she heard. "This is one of the most extensive corruption cases I've ever seen," she said. "Deputy Morrison isn't just a bad cop. He's been running a criminal enterprise from behind his badge. And the cover-up involves multiple officials who were supposed to be protecting the public." The Assistant Attorney General promised to launch a full investigation, but she warned that it would take time to build a case strong enough to overcome the political protection that Morrison enjoyed. She also warned that the investigation would likely expose Marcus and the victims to retaliation from the corrupt officials. "These people have been operating with impunity for years," Thompson explained. "They won't give up without a fight, and they have the resources to make life very difficult for anyone who threatens them." Marcus nodded grimly. He had expected this warning, but he was committed to seeing the investigation through to its conclusion. What do you need from us? Keep documenting everything, Thompson replied. Every interaction with Morrison or his associates, every threat or intimidation attempt, every piece of evidence you can gather. We need to build a case that's so strong that even Morrison's political connections can't protect him. Over the following weeks, Marcus worked closely with Thompson's team to provide evidence and coordinate the investigation. He used his business connections to gather information about Morrison's criminal associates, and he provided financial resources to help the victims access counseling and legal support. The investigation began to gain momentum as more victims came forward. Word had spread through the community that someone was finally taking action against Morrison, and women who had been silent for years began to share their stories. Marcus realized that Morrison's crimes had affected far more people than anyone had imagined. The deputy had been systematically victimizing women for over a decade, and the cover-up had enabled him to continue his crimes while his victims suffered in silence. The wealthy farmer who had built his empire through hard work and honest dealing was appalled by the scope of the corruption he had uncovered. Marcus Henderson was beginning to understand that his battle against Morrison was not just about achieving justice for the victims. It was about exposing a system of corruption that had been destroying lives while masquerading as law enforcement. As the investigation progressed, Marcus became increasingly aware that he and his family were being watched. Strange vehicles would park near the farm, and he noticed that his phone calls were being monitored. Rebecca reported similar surveillance, and several of the other victims complained of harassment and intimidation. Morrison and his associates were clearly aware of the investigation, and they were using their resources to try to silence the victims and their supporters. Marcus realized that the situation was escalating, and he began to fear for his family's safety. The concerned father who had followed his daughter to protect her was now facing the possibility that his involvement in the investigation had put his entire family at risk. Marcus Henderson was about to learn that fighting corruption requires more than just courage and resources. It requires a willingness to sacrifice everything for the cause of justice. Despite the growing danger, Marcus refused to back down. He had seen the evidence of Morrison's crimes, and he had witnessed the courage of the women who had been fighting for justice. He could not abandon them now, even if it meant risking everything he had built. The wealthy farmer who had spent his life building a legacy was about to discover that his greatest achievement would be helping to expose a conspiracy that had been poisoning his community for years. Marcus Henderson's battle against corruption was about to reach its climax, and the consequences would ripple through their small Nebraska town for generations to come. The harassment and intimidation escalated rapidly Once Morrison realized that the investigation was serious and well-funded, Marcus's farm equipment was vandalized, and several of his employees reported being questioned by men who claimed to be federal investigators, but provided no proper identification. Rebecca was pulled over 3 times in 1 week by different deputies, each time subjected to lengthy searches and questioning about her activities. The message was clear. The corruption network was trying to intimidate the Henderson family into abandoning their fight for justice. Marcus met with Assistant Attorney General Thompson to discuss the escalating situation. "They're getting desperate," Thompson explained. "This level of harassment tells me that Morrison and his associates know the investigation is closing in on them. But it also means the danger to you and your family is increasing." Thompson offered to provide protection for the Henderson family, but Marcus declined. "We can't hide from this," he said. "If we back down now, Morrison wins and all those women will never get justice. Besides, if we disappear, it will look like we're guilty of something." Instead, Marcus decided to take a more aggressive approach. He hired additional security for the farm and his family, and he began documenting every instance of harassment and intimidation. He also started reaching out to media contacts, preparing to go public with the story if the official investigation was compromised. The breakthrough came when one of Morrison's criminal associates, a drug dealer named Tommy Rodriguez, was arrested on federal charges. Facing decades in prison, Rodriguez agreed to cooperate with the investigation and provide testimony about Morrison's involvement in criminal activity. Rodriguez's testimony revealed the full scope of Morrison's criminal enterprise. The deputy had been taking bribes to protect drug operations, facilitating illegal gambling, and extorting local businesses. He had also been using his position to cover up crimes committed by his associates, including assault, theft, and fraud. Most damaging of all, Rodriguez revealed that Morrison had been selling information about ongoing investigations to criminal suspects, allowing them to destroy evidence and intimidate witnesses. The corruption was so extensive that it had compromised virtually every law enforcement operation in the county. Armed with Rodriguez's testimony and the evidence gathered by Marcus and the victims, Thompson was finally ready to move forward with arrests. Federal agents simultaneously raided Morrison's home, Sheriff Patterson's office, and the prosecutor's office, seizing computers, financial records, and other evidence. Morrison was arrested at his home and charged with multiple federal crimes, including civil rights violations, conspiracy, extortion, and drug trafficking. Sheriff Patterson and District Attorney Chen were also arrested and charged with conspiracy and obstruction of justice. The arrests sent shockwaves through the community. Many residents had trusted these officials for years, never suspecting that they were running a criminal enterprise behind their badges. The revelation that the people charged with protecting the community had been systematically victimizing innocent citizens was almost too much to believe. Marcus felt a mixture of relief and vindication as he watched the news coverage of the arrests. After months of danger and uncertainty, justice was finally being served. The women who had been victimized by Morrison would finally have their day in court, and the corruption that had been poisoning their community would be exposed. But Marcus also knew that the fight was far from over. The arrests were just the beginning. The real battle would be in the courtroom, where Morrison and his associates would use every resource at their disposal to avoid conviction. The wealthy farmer who had followed his daughter into the darkness had helped expose one of the most extensive corruption cases in Nebraska history. Marcus Henderson's journey from concerned father to justice warrior had changed not only his life, but the lives of everyone in their community. As the news of the arrest spread, Marcus received calls from reporters, law enforcement officials, and community leaders. Everyone wanted to know how a simple farmer had managed to expose such an extensive conspiracy. "It wasn't me," Marcus told reporters. "It was my daughter and the other brave women who refused to stay silent. I just provided the resources they needed to fight back. The real heroes are the victims who had the courage to speak out despite the danger." Rebecca stood beside her father at the press conference, her face reflecting the pride and determination that had driven her to fight for justice. "We couldn't have done this without my dad's support," she said. "But we also couldn't have done it without the strength and courage of every woman who came forward to tell her story." The press conference marked the end of the investigation phase and the beginning of the legal battle. Morrison, Patterson, and Chen all pleaded not guilty to the charges against them, and their attorneys began preparing aggressive defense strategies. Marcus knew that the trials would be long and difficult. The defendants had significant resources and political connections, and they would fight hard to avoid conviction. But he also knew that the evidence was overwhelming, and the testimony of the victims would be powerful and compelling. The wealthy farmer who had built his fortune through careful planning and calculated risks was about to face the ultimate test of his commitment to justice. Marcus Henderson's battle against corruption had reached its climax, and the outcome would determine whether the victims would finally receive the justice they deserved. As the legal proceedings began, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. What had started as a simple desire to protect his daughter had evolved into a fight for the soul of their community. The concerned father who had followed his daughter into the darkness had emerged as a champion of justice, and the consequences of his actions would ripple through their small Nebraska town for generations to come. The trials began 6 months later, with Morrison facing the most serious charges. The prosecution presented a devastating case, featuring testimony from over 20 victims and extensive evidence of Morrison's criminal activities. The evidence included financial records showing bribes and extortion payments, recorded conversations revealing Morrison's criminal associations, and physical evidence linking him to multiple crimes. Rebecca was one of the key witnesses, and her testimony was both powerful and emotional. She described how Morrison had systematically victimized women in their community while using his badge to intimidate anyone who might expose him. Her detailed account of the investigation and the evidence they had gathered brought many jurors to tears. Marcus watched from the gallery as his daughter faced Morrison's defense attorney, who tried unsuccessfully to discredit her testimony. Rebecca remained calm and composed, answering every question with precision and clarity. The wealthy farmer felt immense pride as he watched his daughter courageously confront the man who had terrorized so many women. The defense tried to argue that Morrison was being framed by disgruntled citizens and that the evidence had been fabricated. But the prosecution's case was too strong, and the testimony of the victims was too consistent and detailed to be dismissed as false. Tommy Rodriguez's testimony was particularly damaging. The drug dealer provided detailed accounts of Morrison's criminal activities, including specific dates, locations, and amounts of money involved in various criminal transactions. Rodriguez's testimony was corroborated by financial records and surveillance footage that the federal investigators had obtained. The prosecution also called Marcus to testify about his role in the investigation. He described how his concern for his daughter had led him to discover the secret meetings, and how he had used his resources to help the victims gather evidence and access federal authorities. "I followed my daughter that night because I was worried about her safety," Marcus told the jury. "I never imagined that she was involved in something so important and dangerous. What I discovered was that my daughter and these other brave women were fighting a battle that our entire community should have been fighting." Marcus's testimony helped establish the credibility of the investigation and demonstrated that the evidence had been gathered through legitimate means. His reputation in the community and his willingness to risk everything for justice impressed the jury and strengthened the prosecution's case. The defense's strategy became increasingly desperate as the trial progressed. Morrison's attorney tried to argue that the deputy had been entrapped by federal agents, but there was no evidence to support this claim. They also tried to suggest that the victims were lying for financial gain, but the prosecution showed that none of the victims had received any money or compensation for their testimony. As the trial neared its conclusion, it became clear that Morrison's conviction was inevitable. The evidence was overwhelming, the testimony was credible, and the jury was clearly convinced of his guilt. The only question was whether he would receive the maximum sentence. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all charges. Morrison was convicted of civil rights violations, conspiracy, extortion, drug trafficking, and multiple counts of assault and sexual misconduct. The judge sentenced him to 35 years in federal prison, ensuring that he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. Sheriff Patterson and District Attorney Chen were also convicted and sentenced to lengthy prison terms. The entire corruption network that had been poisoning the community for years was finally dismantled, and the officials who had betrayed the public trust were held accountable for their crimes. Marcus felt a profound sense of relief and satisfaction as he watched Morrison being led away in handcuffs. The battle for justice had been long and dangerous, but it had been worth every risk and sacrifice. The women who had been victimized by Morrison would finally have closure, and the community would be protected from further corruption. After the trial, Marcus was approached by federal officials who wanted to recognize his contribution to the investigation. They offered him awards and commendations, but Marcus declined most of them, preferring to let the focus remain on the victims and their courage. "I didn't do anything special," Marcus told the officials. "I just supported my daughter and the other women who were fighting for justice. They're the real heroes in this story." The Henderson family received national attention for their role in exposing the corruption. Marcus was invited to speak at conferences and events about the importance of citizen involvement in fighting corruption. He used these opportunities to encourage others to speak out against injustice and to support victims of abuse. Rebecca decided to use her experience to help other victims of corruption and abuse. She enrolled in law school and began working with organizations that provided legal assistance to victims of police misconduct. Her experience in organizing the investigation had shown her the importance of having advocates who could help victims navigate the complex legal system. The farm continued to prosper under Marcus's management, but he found that his priorities had changed. While he still cared about the business and his family's financial security, he was now more focused on using his resources and influence to help others and to fight for justice. Marcus established a foundation that provided financial assistance to victims of corruption and abuse. The foundation helped pay for legal fees, counseling services, and other support that victims needed to rebuild their lives. He also worked with law enforcement agencies to improve training and accountability measures. The community that had been poisoned by corruption began to heal. New officials were elected to replace those who had been convicted, and reforms were implemented to prevent future corruption. The citizens became more engaged in local government, and there was a renewed sense of civic responsibility and pride. Marcus often reflected on the night he had followed his daughter to the abandoned farmhouse. That simple decision, made out of parental concern, had led to one of the most significant experiences of his life. He had discovered that his daughter was not just the responsible young woman he had raised, but a courageous leader who was willing to risk everything for justice. The wealthy farmer who had built his fortune through hard work and honest dealing had learned that his greatest achievement was not the empire he had built, but the courage and integrity he had instilled in his daughter. Marcus Henderson's journey from concerned father to justice warrior had changed not only his life, but the lives of everyone in their community. Years later, as Marcus walked through his fields and looked at the thriving farm that had been his life's work, he knew that his true legacy was not the land or the buildings or the financial success. His true legacy was the knowledge that he had stood up for what was right when it mattered most, and that he had helped ensure that justice was served for those who had been wronged. The story of Marcus Henderson and his daughter Rebecca became legendary in their small Nebraska town. It was a story of courage, determination, and the power of ordinary people to do extraordinary things when they refuse to stand by while others suffer. The wealthy farmer who had followed his daughter into the darkness had emerged as a champion of justice, and the consequences of his actions would be felt for generations to come. Marcus Henderson had proven that sometimes the most important battles are not fought for profit or personal gain, but for the simple principle that right should triumph over wrong, no matter the cost. The abandoned farmhouse where the secret meetings had taken place was eventually purchased by Marcus and converted into a community center. The building that had once hidden the planning of a fight for justice became a symbol of hope and renewal for the entire community. Marcus often visited the center, remembering the night when his simple desire to protect his daughter had led to the most important battle of his life. He would think about the courage of the women who had refused to stay silent, and the power of truth to overcome even the most entrenched corruption. The wealthy farmer who had built his empire through careful planning and calculated risks had learned that some things were worth more than money or safety. Marcus Henderson had discovered that the greatest victories were not measured in profits or property, but in the knowledge that justice had been served, and that the innocent had been protected from those who would harm them. As the sun set over the Nebraska plains, casting long shadows across the fields that had been his life's work, Marcus Henderson knew that he had lived a life of purpose and meaning. The concerned father who had followed his daughter into the darkness had become a champion of justice, and the story of their fight against corruption would inspire others for generations to come. The wealthy farmer who had thought his greatest achievement was building a successful business had learned that his true legacy was the courage and integrity he had instilled in his daughter, and the knowledge that he had stood up for what was right when it mattered most. Marcus Henderson's journey from concerned father to justice warrior was complete, but the impact of his actions would continue to ripple through their community for years to come. In the end, the story of Marcus Henderson was not just about a father protecting his daughter, or even about exposing corruption in a small Nebraska town. It was about the power of ordinary people to do extraordinary things when they refuse to accept injustice, and the importance of standing up for what is right, even when the cost is high. The wealthy farmer who had followed his daughter after sunset had discovered something far more valuable than he had ever imagined. He had found the true meaning of courage, the power of truth, and the satisfaction that comes from knowing that justice has been served. Marcus Henderson's legacy would live on in the lives of all those who had been touched by his fight for justice, and in the knowledge that even the most powerful corruption can be defeated when good people refuse to remain silent. The fight was over, but the victory would last forever. Marcus Henderson had proven that sometimes the most important battles are won not by the wealthy or the powerful, but by ordinary people who have the courage to do what is right, no matter the cost. The wealthy farmer who had built his empire through hard work and honest dealing had achieved something far greater than financial success. He had helped ensure that justice would triumph over corruption, and that the innocent would be protected from those who would harm them. The story of Marcus Henderson and his daughter Rebecca would be told for generations, a testament to the power of courage, determination, and the unshakable belief that right will ultimately triumph over wrong. The wealthy farmer who had followed his daughter into the darkness had emerged as a champion of justice, and the consequences of his actions would be felt throughout their community for years to come. As the years passed, Marcus continued to use his resources and influence to fight for justice and support victims of corruption and abuse. He never forgot the lesson he had learned that night at the abandoned farmhouse, that sometimes the most important battles are fought not for personal gain, but for the simple principle that every person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. The wealthy farmer who had built his fortune through careful planning and calculated risks had discovered that his greatest achievement was not the empire he had built, but the courage and integrity he had instilled in his daughter, and the knowledge that he had stood up for what was right when it mattered most. Marcus Henderson's journey from concerned father to justice warrior was a testament to the power of ordinary people to do extraordinary things when they refuse to accept injustice. The story ended where it began, with a father's love for his daughter and his desire to protect her from harm. But what Marcus Henderson had discovered was that sometimes protecting the people we love means joining them in their fight for justice, even when that fight takes us into the darkness. The wealthy farmer who had followed his daughter after sunset had found something far more valuable than he had ever imagined: the knowledge that justice had been served, and that the innocent had been protected from those who would harm them. In the end, Marcus Henderson's legacy was not measured in acres of farmland or dollars in the bank, but in the lives that had been changed by his courage and determination. The wealthy farmer who had built his empire through hard work and honest dealing had achieved something far greater than financial success. He had helped ensure that justice would triumph over corruption, and that future generations would be protected from the kind of abuse that had poisoned their community for so long. The fight for justice was over, but the victory would last forever. Marcus Henderson had proven that sometimes the most important battles are won not by the wealthy or the powerful, but by ordinary people who have the courage to do what is right, no matter the cost. The story of the wealthy farmer who followed his daughter after sunset and discovered a conspiracy that would change everything had become a legend, a testament to the power of truth, courage, and the unshakable belief that right will ultimately triumph over wrong.